Okay, this is 101, week 8, part 7. So now you know how to quote and paraphrase and summarize, and you got to introduce quotes and paraphrases and summarizing, and you got to talk about what you quoted or paraphrased or summarized. That's basic citation. And you know that you need probably something in parentheses after the quotes, and you know that anything that you quote needs to be listed in a works cited at the end. See, the idea is that anything you quoted in the paper, the technical information for whatever that is at the end of your paper. The things at the end of your paper are things you discussed in the paper. I very often get papers from students where they put all this stuff in the works cited, but they never mentioned it or quoted it in the paper. Don't do that. Quote and discuss, and they're like, well, I read it. Well, no. It's not a list of things you read. It's a list of things you quoted and discussed. So make sure you do that. And that's basically it. And I know it's boring and aggravating, but the idea is that you should be able to connect every quotation or citation in your paper should connect to something in the works cited at the end so that somebody could find out, look it up in the exact book or whatever. To go to the library and get a book that looks just like the one you used and see that the quote you said is on the exact page you said it was on. I know nobody does that, but that's the idea. It's stupid. I hate it. Okay. So now we come to a larger, this is more interesting now. That was the most boring part. It's over. It's still pretty boring, but we got to keep going. So now you know how to cite, introduce citations, quotation, paraphrase, summary, discuss them. You know the technical information, like page numbers or line numbers or whatever that you quoted, and you know that you got to have all that technical information at the bottom of the paper, like the publisher and the year and the name of the author and the name of the book, and does the book go in italics or does it go in quotation marks, and you got to have maybe a translator, maybe an editor, maybe there's all kinds of the website. You got to have all this stuff at the bottom. My students love to just be like youtube.com, but you got to say, what's the name of the YouTube video? What's the exact address? What's the who's running that? Who's speaking in the YouTube video? Right? I gotta have all this information. Okay, but now we come to a larger philosophical problem, which is that now that you know how to do all that, you also have to judge what's worth quoting in a college paper. Now, a lot of the time, what's worth quoting in a college paper is really easy to figure out because your teacher gave it to you and they said, fucking quote this. And then you know it's worth quoting in a college paper because it's part of the instructions. But a lot of times what's worth quoting in a college paper, your teachers will ask you to find things to discuss. And that's part of college, is you need to maybe look something up on your own. Find out, you have an assignment and you need to do a little bit of research to help make your paper longer or better. And so you're gonna wanna go find things to quote. And then the question becomes, how do you know what's worth quoting in a college paper? So I have this handout as part of the citation handout called "What is Worth Citing," because that's part of it, right? You got to know how to cite, and then you got to know the technical information, but you also got to know what's worth citing. Because sometimes students will do all the they'll cite correctly and they'll put all the technical information. But the problem is they've quoted something that's fucking stupid and should not be in a college paper. So, there's a squirrel really staring at me, freaking me out a little bit. I feel like he was going to jump on me, guys. Squirrel's really look at him. There he is. Yep. Go away, squirrel. Nobody likes you. Okay, go fuck off. All right, I hate nature. Let's go and let's talk about how you know what's worth quoting. And I have a list of things here, so we're going to kind of go through and discuss them so we can kind of learn what's worth quoting in a college paper. So number one, the most important thing you're going to need to know if something's worth quoting in a college paper is it relevant or not? Meaning, does it connect to your topic well? It seems like an obvious one, but students have a lot of trouble with this. You need research that relates to what you are writing about closely. That seems obvious, but students often get research that's not related closely. It's just sort of related. For example, students will, sometimes I'll get papers on students and they're writing about philosophy and they'll say, Webster's dictionary defines philosophy as, that's not research. You don't need to do that, because it's not really relevant. I know you're writing a paper on philosophy, but what I need is research on your specific opinion for this specific paper, not a definition of philosophy because that's you're in trouble. You know your quote is not relevant to your paper when anybody in class could use that quote, right? Because Plato's a philosopher, so you can imagine a situation where every student in class, their research was that Webster's dictionary definition of philosophy. But you see, if every single student can use their quote in their paper, the same quote, then it's not specific enough to your paper, right? You picked a quote, it's too general. It relates to everybody's paper on the whole class. You don't want research that relates to everybody's paper on the whole class. You want research that relates specifically to the opinion you've got in your paper. So a definition of philosophy, a definition of love, a definition of theater, not super helpful because it's something all your other classmates could do. It's not relevant enough. It's not specifically connected to your paper. How do you find relevant information for your paper? Well, one of the ways you do that, students are often like, they'll see a list of books at the end of somebody's paper, and they'll be like, holy shit, did this guy read all these books just to write this one paper? No, he didn't. I was asked, I'll tell you a story, just a really fast one. I was asked to give a speech at the Strand bookstore about Iago. Iago is the villain in a Shakespeare play called Othello. Well, I have this book in my office called Shakespeare. It's a book about Shakespeare by a guy named Harold Bloom, and he wrote it's an 850-page book where he wrote about every single thing Shakespeare wrote about, and he put it in this book. Fine. So did I read the whole book? Well, actually I did. But the point is that did I reread the book before I gave the speech? No. What did I do? Well, I only looked at the chapter, because he has the book is about Shakespeare wrote like 39 plays, so he's got 39 chapters in that book. And I just read one chapter, the chapter about Othello. Did I read the whole chapter? No, I did not. Because I wasn't asked to talk about the whole play. I was asked to talk about one character in the play. So I took a look at the chapter, but I kind of skimmed it. And there's a lot of characters in Shakespeare's Othello. There's Othello, there's Desdemona, there's Emilia, there's Rodrigo, there's Cassio, there's Iago. The only guy I'm interested in is Iago. So I didn't read the whole book. I just read the chapter. I didn't read the whole book on Shakespeare. I just read the chapter on Othello. But I didn't read the whole chapter on Othello. I just read the paragraphs that were about this one character, Iago. And then I quoted that in my speech. So you don't have to read the whole thing because, again, you're looking for something that closely connects to your topic. My topic, it's sort of Shakespeare. It's sort of the play Othello, but it's actually just the character Iago in the play Othello by Shakespeare. So my research wasn't research about Shakespeare generally. It wasn't even research about this play generally. It was research about this one character in the play because that's what I was writing about. So that's what you're looking for, is to kind of narrow it down to specifically what you are talking about in your paper. How do you do that? A lot of times that's just going to be looking at if it's a book, you want to look at the chapters, and there's an index at the back that tells you what page lots of different things are discussed on. When I was writing my dissertation, I was interested in and I wrote a part of my dissertation when I was getting my PhD in English literature was I wrote about these different poems. And I would write about one poem by one guy, and I would find any book that mentioned the poem, and I wouldn't read the whole book. I just read the pages about the poem. How did I know what pages it was on? It's in the index. So they'd be like, oh, this poem is discussed just in these 4 pages. And then instead of reading the whole book, I just read the 4 pages. So you want to find stuff that specifically relates to you. Just don't jump. So if you're writing a paper, I did not start my speech off by talking about Shakespeare in general or Othello in general. My research was focused on this one character in this one play by this one guy. So narrow it down a little bit. Okay, cool. The next thing you want to do is figure out the author of the thing you're reading. Is the author trustworthy? Can you trust them? Now, some of your teachers have said not to use Google in your research, and I understand why they say that. And it's sort of true, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that's true later. But what you can use Google to do is just look up the author, see what they do for a living. If it's a guy in a basement with a high school degree, don't quote him. But if it's a professor at Yale, quote him. So it depends. You got to check to make sure, is the person trustworthy? Do they know what they're talking about? And a famous classical example of this is we have a lot of Hollywood actors who like to give health advice to people. But Hollywood actors, what do they do for a living? Well, they pretend to be people in the movies. They get paid a lot of money. Awesome. Does that make them health experts? No, it does not. It does not. Gwyneth Paltrow is not a health expert. She's an actress. She's not trustworthy. So who should you trust? Someone with a medical degree. Does it mean people with medical degrees are always right 100% of the time? No. But you're taking a bet. You're betting. And I would bet that I would trust someone with a medical degree before I would trust an actor. That's why I take my advice from people with medical degrees and not actors. Am I going to be right 100% of the time? No. But am I probably going to be right? Yes. All right, I'm picking up in the next video.